Alright, regionally, let's talk about what was going on the East Coast. So, during the early and middle Triassic, the first period in the Mesozoic, you get a bunch of kind of heavy sediment being weathered and eroded from the recently created Appalachian mountains at the end of the Alleghenian orogeny. And that sediment is filling in kind of on either side of the Appalachian Mountains, including into the coastal regions. So what I want to point out to you kind of is this area here. So we have the newly created Appalachian Mountains. It's that rugged terrain here. But what I want to point out to you as this is kind of continuing through the next few slides, look at the sedimentation that occurs. You can see that kind of, it almost looks like sand buildup kind of occurring. Let me go back. So when we start when we end the Permian, we have during the Paleozoic, we have all these mountains created, and then through the Triassic, they start to weather and erode. So we're dumping large amounts of sediment off of these Appalachian mountains that get uplifted. And that's kind of the story of mountains. They get uplifted, and they get ground down. They get uplifted, and then they get ground down. As weathering and erosion continued during the Mesozoic, this once massive mountain range was reduced in some places to a very low-lying plain. And even today, the Appalachian Mountains they seem small compared to other mountain ranges, like the Rocky Mountains or even the Sierra Nevada Mountains. Those mountains are really young. When you see mountains that have like really pointy peaks to them, really sharp peaks, and are really tall, geologically they're pretty young. The Appalachians are pretty old. Right? They happened back in the Paleozoic. We haven't even talked about the Rocky Mountains being formed yet, modern-day Rocky Mountains being formed yet. So the Appalachian Mountains, even though they're not very high, they are very old. So keep an eye again on this area as Pangaea begins to break up. The mountains really start to kind of get ground down. You can see starting now, the sharp, rugged areas are really getting ground down. In some places, it's almost non-existent. All right, so on the East Coast, as the Atlantic Ocean grew and the rifting kind of ceased along the margin of North America, the edge of North America, which was once on an active plate margin, it became a passive plate margin. So the East Coast is a passive margin, meaning it's away from a plate boundary. Once Pangaea was breaking up, when that started, right, North America and Africa, once that started, the East Coast was right near a boundary. But as that separation continued, that boundary moved further and further away, or more appropriately, North America moved further and further away from that divergent boundary. So we went from active margin geology to more of a passive margin, which is more indicative of sediment building up and being deposited instead of things being kind of built up tectonically. So keep an eye on this portion of North America, the East Coast, what we're talking about. All right. You'll see out here is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is now a divergent boundary. Let me go back. Just keep an eye on how this margin, the edge of the continent, gets further and further away from that boundary as Pangaea continues to break up. The sediments produced by the erosion of the Appalachian Mountains, even though it's a passive margin, weathering and erosion occurs. So now the Appalachian Mountains, instead of being built up or being ground down, and all that sediment is kind of going either way, some of it contributing to the growth of the continental shelf off the East Coast. So keep an eye on this area. Keep an eye on the kind of lighter blue areas right through here, and you'll see it subtly grow. That's the continental shelf. That's the area still of continental crust that's underneath the ocean. And so just keep an eye on that light blue area. You see it? It kind of just ticked out just a little bit. A little bit more. A little bit more. So, very subtle. But that's helped to extend the East Coast during this time period. So let's go ahead and pause here. Again, not much going on the East Coast except for the Appalachian Mountains getting ground down. So let's kind of shift a little south and let's talk about the Gulf coastal region. We'll see back here in just a second.